Today we're out here taking a look at the winner of my 2016 Best Crossover Utility Vehicle, and that is the 2016 Kia Sorento. The Sorento is a testament to just how serious Kia is at competing in every segment in the United States, because it was only 2014 when we saw a majorly refreshed Sorento, and now 2016 is bringing us an all-new Sorento. Now, the key to understanding the Sorento is that this can be seen as the Goldilocks just right-sized crossover. It is not a compact crossover like a RAV4 or CR-V, but it's not a large three-row crossover like a Pathfinder or a Honda Pilot. Likewise, the Sorento is priced very differently than the competition. It starts at $24,900, which is right around where the RAV4 and CR-V live. But in top-end trim like we're taking a look at right here, it ends up at around $45,000. It is actually a viable alternative to an Acura MDX. 2016 brings us probably the most aggressive version of Kia's front-end design other than the K900 luxury sedan. Our model has the optional HID low beams, and we also have the optional 4-module fog lamps on either side. Now, some key things to know here are that these HID headlamps do not steer in the corners, and the high beams are still halogen lamps in this version. However, we do have some luxury features up front that you don't find in most of the competition, like an all-around view camera and an available radar cruise control system. Since we are in the top-end model, we also get stainless steel scuff plates on the bottom of the bumper. The size of the Sorento is key to understanding where this fits in with the competition. This is about 8 inches longer than a Toyota RAV4 at 187.4 inches long, but it is also about 5 inches shorter than a Toyota Highlander. Now, keeping in mind that the Highlander is not one of the larger three-row crossovers, this is actually about 16 inches shorter than a Chevy Traverse. However, this is still a three-row crossover, and it's most notable right back here where we get this very square profile to the rear end of the vehicle, even though the window line does plunge towards the rear a little bit. Also key to understanding the Sorento is that this is available as either a two-row or a three-row crossover. There are both versions available in the US. While the overall length is shorter than something like a Toyota Highlander, the interior space is actually not that far off because Kia does make the most of the exterior dimensions. The front end, as you can see, is very blunt and very upright, and so is the rear end of the vehicle. We don't really have a bumper that sticks out very far. That means that Kia has really maximized what we see inside. Many of you may be wondering how this slots with the very closely related Hyundai Santa Fe and Santa Fe Sport. This actually comes in right between the two of them. The Santa Fe Sport is a dedicated two-row crossover that's shorter than this, and the Santa Fe is a dedicated three-row crossover that's a little bit longer. Without a doubt, Kias of the past have been a little bit boring, but lately Kia has really stepped up their styling game. We get that much more aggressive front-end look, and out back we have these sort of Angry Birds themed tail lamps as well. They have some little U-shapes right here in the LED modules. They are quite attractive. Now, for me, the interesting takeaway in the Kia Sorento's general design for 2016 is that this does not come across as a cheap vehicle that can be optioned on up to the stratosphere. Instead, this actually comes across more like an expensive vehicle that they've cut a few things from in order to drop the price that low. And that's generally the method that I prefer. The large number of competitors is very obvious under the hood because many crossovers out there that this competes with only have one or possibly two engine options. But we actually get three options in the 2016 model. Things start out with a base 2.4-liter four-cylinder engine that's relatively similar to most of those compact crossovers you see out there. It produces 185 horsepower and 178 pound-feet of torque. Then we get this 3.3-liter V6 engine that produces 290 horsepower and 252 pound-feet of torque. This is quite similar to what you see in most mid-sized three-row crossovers. This engine is available in the LX V6, EX V6, SX V6, and Limited V6 models, which is actually the larger portion of the Sorento's portfolio. Available in the EX and the Limited model is a brand new 2-liter turbocharged engine. It produces 240 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. That 2-liter turbo is relatively similar to what we see in something like a Ford Explorer or in the Ford Edge. All engines are mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission with available all-wheel drive. You can get all-wheel drive on every Sorento model except for the base L model. Fuel economy is best in that base 2.4-liter engine, coming in at 21 miles per gallon city, 29 highway with 24 miles per gallon combined, and it's lowest in the all-wheel drive V6 model that we're taking a look at here, coming in at 19 miles per gallon combined. The turbo slots between the two, but it's a little bit more skewed towards that 2.4. Again, it is important to keep in mind that the Sorento compares with a wide variety of vehicles. I'm going to give these front seats, however, 10 out of 10 in the version that we're taking a look at here, even though this does compete with the likes of the Grand Cherokee, the Ford Edge, etc. The Grand Cherokee seats are a little bit too hard, and they seem to have a very hard center bottom cushion, which makes it feel like you're sitting on the seat, not in the seat, if that makes any sense to you. We have a multi-way driver's seat that is actually more adjustable than you'll find in the vast majority of even entry-level luxury vehicles. We have an extending thigh cushion. We also have a four-way adjustable lumbar support with a wide range of motion. In addition to that, we have four-way adjustable headrests, which are fairly unique in the mass market segment. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a moderate range of motion, making it easier for larger or taller drivers to find an ideal driving position. Driver's seat comfort does change considerably when you work your way up from the bottom Sorento to the top end Sorento model. That's because the base model does get a manual seat. Most models that you'll find on dealer lots will have an 8-way power driver's seat, and many vehicles will also have an 8-way power passenger seat. Second row comfort comes in at 8 out of 10 points. You will obviously find less room in the second row than you will find in the larger 3-row crossovers, so especially something like a Nissan Pathfinder, a Ford Explorer, etc., they'll have a little bit more legroom. Now that said, the rear seats themselves are among the most comfortable in this segment. They're large and softly padded, and if you get the 3-row option, they do scoot forward and backward to help you apportion the third row space a little bit more amicably. They also recline. We have a little recline lever here, and they do have a decent amount of recline to them. They also go into a very upright position if you want to square off the cargo area in the back for carrying large cargo. Another nice touch in the second row is that you can fold a portion of the 60% side down separately, giving this a 40-20-40 folding approach. Now the one key thing is that you cannot fold this 40% section down separately from this section because it does tie in with that one right there. So you have to fold both of them together, or you can unlatch that one and then you can actually put this section back upright. The second row is a 60-40 design, but interestingly enough, the 60 and the 40 side don't fold in the same way. Now both sides do fold completely flat like this with a lever on the side, allowing you to put large cargo all the way in across the second row. But only this 40% side has a different motion to it. So we have a little lever right up here. You can actually move it to that position and then slide it forward to gain easier entry to the third row. Now, if you're over there on that 60% side, the only way you can do that same action is to just fold it down, and then you have a little bit further to climb over to get into the third row. There's really no aisleway here for your feet. Obviously, because the Sorento is not a terribly large 3-row crossover, the third row is much more compact than you'll find in something like a Nissan Pathfinder. However, the seats themselves are actually quite comfortable. They're still very thickly padded like we find in the second row. And that is actually a bit of a surprise. In addition, these also use the same leather and in the same design as the front row and the second row in the vehicle. That's something that you don't find in all the 3-row crossovers out there. Obviously, plastics quality drops as we go towards the rear in the third row, but we do have a few nice touches back here that I did not expect for a car with such a compact third row. Like we have a third row rear air conditioning control back here. This is not a second row control. This actually is just back here in the third row with vents on either side. We also have cup holders and a small storage cubby right over here. The big problem with the third row, and the reason I'm giving this 6 out of 10 points, is the headroom. If I were to sit back in this seat, I would have to crane my head like this in order to sit upright. That means that you do have to either hunch forward or slouch down a little bit in order to use this third row. However, surprisingly enough, legroom really isn't that bad. If I were to move this second row seat all the way back in its tracks and then move it back to a comfortable position, you can see that even though my legs are up in the air, I actually have a little bit of legroom left. This is what I usually refer to as the emergency third row, and I think it's a very handy thing to have. It obviously is still the place for naughty children or your mother-in-law, but I would rather have a third row like this than not. Even though the Sorento is relatively compact for a 3-row crossover, you actually don't find that much more room even in something large like a Nissan Pathfinder. Now, I did have troubles putting 24 and 26-inch roller bags right here behind the third row. I'll fold this up so you can see how little room there is left right there behind the third row seats. However, the surprising thing is you really only find a few more inches in the Pathfinder, even though it's about a foot longer. Something like a Chevy Traverse is a full 16 inches longer, and you do find another about 6 inches of luggage room that does make it a lot more convenient. However, this vehicle, you really have the choice between 7 passengers or 5 passengers and 5 passengers worth of cargo. There's really no ability to put 7 passengers worth of stuff in the Sorento. Taking a detailed look around the interior, we do have this very large panoramic moonroof. You can see it goes all the way back there to behind the second row passengers' heads. Our model also has these well-integrated sunshades in the rear doors. Those are optional. And because we are in the top level model, we also have these 4-way adjustable headrests. They go in and out and up and down. The shoulder belts are adjustable for the front passengers, and if we move down here, you'll notice that we do have the optional and very attractive Napa leather seats. These are both heated and ventilated. You can see that the ventilation is done through these perforations on the seats that are actually perforated in sort of this basket weave pattern. Over on the door panels, we do find a high percentage of soft touch plastic, and that's what separates this from the more inexpensive options in this segment. So this upper portion of the door, this middle portion of the door, and the armrest, those are all soft touch plastics. You don't find hard touch plastics until the bottom portion of the door with that bottle holder in the front corner. The soft touch plastics are a big differentiator between this and the previous generation Sorento, and between this and the compact competition, because we do have a soft touch injection molded upper dashboard, and this main portion of the dashboard is also soft touch. So you don't find hard touch plastics until they're way out of reach from the passengers. We have a moderately sized glove compartment. This is a bin style arrangement that drops down from the dashboard. You'll find a little bit more room in some of the larger competitors like the Ford Edge. Over on the dashboard, our model has the center channel speaker. We also have the 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system. If you want to know more about this generation of Yuvo, then go ahead and click that link at the bottom of your screen. You'll be taken on over to our dedicated review. We have an eject button over here, a single optical disc player right over here, and then you'll find the mapping database on an SD card right there behind that little door. One important consideration in this generation of Kia's infotainment and navigation system is that we are told that this may receive the software update in order to support Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Kia has been a little bit cagey on this one, but they have implied that 2016 models should be able to get that software update at some point here soon. Our model has the optional keyless start, so we do have that button right over here. And one nice touch is that you'll notice on the steering column, we don't have any cutouts right here. So they actually use a different steering column in the models with keyless start. That is a nice luxury touch. We have dual zone climate control in our model. Again, that is optional as well. We have the heated and ventilated seats right down here on the bottom, and the heated steering wheel. Now, Kia does include a heated steering wheel on a wide variety of models, which is a little bit of a step above the competition. Below those controls, you'll find the single USB input, auxiliary input for that Yuvo system, and two 12-volt power outlets on either side. Now, this is a storage cubby that actually closes right like that, and there's more than enough room for large smartphones and other devices inside. Moving behind that, we have two very large cup holders, a very traditional console shifter. We move over to the left for the manual mode, up for up, and down for down. Park is, of course, all the way up at the top. Now, this button module down here is fairly interesting for this particular segment because we have more features than you find in your average crossover. We have an auto brake hold, which keeps the brake pressure on the brake pedal, so you don't have to keep your foot on that brake at stoplights. Electric parking brake right over here. Now, these are optional. They're not standard on the Sorento. We have a drive mode button that allows you to select between normal, eco, and sport. That controls the way the engine and the transmission behave. And then we have this center lock, which is very unique in the compact crossover segment. We have our optional 360 view camera button right over here, and the parking sensor enable disable button. Behind that, we have a large, softly padded center armrest. This opens to reveal a two-tiered storage bin. We have a little shelf right here that can be put into place. Then we have a storage bin that's large enough to hold a digital SLR, as you can see right there. We have an additional charge port right there. It is a USB charge port, not a 12-volt charge port. On the driver's side, we have the optional LCD instrument cluster, and we have some physical gauges on the left and the right. So on the left side right here, we have the tachometer. On the right, we have the fuel gauge and the engine temperature gauge. Those are physical dials. Everything else you're seeing is an LCD right in the dash. The LCD is controlled via this button and this knob on the steering wheel. This rotates around and then clicks down to enter. The LCD uses this attractive round theme, and we have the speedometer needle all the way around on the outside. Again, this is an all-digital gauge, however. So we change screens and we can rotate between our trip computer, navigation information with lane information if you did have navigation active, our safety system information, lane departure warning, radar cruise control if equipped. We also have our media input right here, our service information, so we can see our tire pressure or service recommendations for the vehicle. And then we lastly have user settings where we can change the way the driver assist system, doors, tailgates, lights, etc., how they all operate. Because this vehicle does have the optional radar adaptive cruise control system, you will see the status of the radar adaptive cruise control on this LCD as well. There would actually be a yellow line going all the way on up to the speed that you have set, and then that would indicate the set speed, the travel speed that you're traveling along to follow the car in front of you, etc. The Sorento uses this attractive 3-spoke Kia steering wheel design. We have relatively aggressive sport grips on the side and right up here as well. We don't find the same sort of sport bumps you find in some of the other Kia models down below, however. This is an almost 3-spoke design with a split bottom spoke, and then our model has this black trim right on top of it. Now this is a heated steering wheel, but importantly, this is not actually wood trim like you'll find in certain versions of the Grand Cherokee. This is just black plastic. I believe they do call it piano black. Over here on the right side, we have our cruise control buttons. Since we do have the radar cruise control, we have a following distance button right there. These are the buttons again that control that multifunction LCD in the dashboard. And then on the left side, we have dedicated phone hang-up and pick-up buttons, mode button, voice command button, and then volume and track up-down buttons for our infotainment system. The V6 model that we're testing here took 6.9 seconds to go from 0 to 60. Now that's pretty good for the average compact crossover segment, but it is slower than you'll see in something like an Acura MDX or an Acura RDX or certain versions of the Lexus RX, that luxury competitor. Because the Sorento is straddling between the compact crossover segment and that luxury segment, I'm going to have to give this a B. Now that score does change around a bit, because if you're taking a look at that base LX V6 model, obviously it's going to be faster 0 to 60 than your average RAV4 or CRV, and in that lineup I would actually give the LX V6 an A, so it really depends on what you're comparing the Sorento to. Regardless of what you compare the Sorento to, however, braking is absolutely excellent, and I actually think unexpectedly excellent actually, because this is not exactly a lightweight crossover like we see out of certain Mazda models, but braking only took 117 feet from 60 to 0, which is very, very short and gives this an A+. Now you should know that the top end trims of the Sorento do use different tires than the base models. These use Michelin tires, the lower end ones don't. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give the Sorento a B+. Again, this is because of the kind of competition that we have. The Durango is a perfectly balanced rear-wheel drive 3-row crossover. Obviously it handles better than this. The MDX does handle better than this in some driving situations, like power on around this corner right here. You'll notice that the MDX will rotate an awful lot more willingly, more like a rear-wheel drive car. However, going around this next corner with the power off, there actually will be very little difference between this and the MDX, and that's because they're both relatively front heavy. Something like a Mazda CX-5 would handle better than this, as well as the Edge Sport, but this is better than your average CRV, RAV4, etc. I also like the way this handles a little bit better than the closely related Santa Fe Sport. When it comes to the ride, Kia did an excellent job of balancing a well-polished ride with the handling abilities of this crossover. I'm actually going to give this an A. Out on this gravel road, the excellent ride characteristics of the Sorento are obvious, because this is not as harsh as many of the luxury crossovers, which are trying to be a little bit sportier than we're seeing here. An interesting thing that a lot of compact crossovers used to have, but don't seem to anymore, is the ability to electrically lock the center coupling in the all-wheel drive system. Now, this doesn't use a true transfer case like you find in something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. It's just not that kind of all-wheel drive design. However, it does allow you to actually lock the multi-plate clutch pack that's in the center that connects the rear axle to the front. That allows you better traction in inclement weather on gravel roads, on snow, etc. than you'd find in your average compact crossover out there. Unlike rugged systems like you find in a 4Runner or in a Grand Cherokee, you can actually leave this lock mode on all the time, because it will only electrically lock that clutch pack at lower speeds, around 20 miles an hour or so, and you don't have the same kind of danger of drivetrain damage that you find when you lock a center differential in, say, a Grand Cherokee. Cabin noise is yet again another score that depends on the model that you're taking a look at. Because we're in the top end trim, and I'm going to give this an A+. This is actually just about as quiet as the last Acura MDX we tested at 69.5 decibels. That's luxury car quiet, right around the BMW X5 as well. However, the base model is around 73 decibels, which is pretty average for the compact crossover segment. As you work your way on up the model ladder, they start adding additional sound deadening measures into the cabin until we get to this top end model that has it all. When it comes to fuel economy, I'm going to give this model a C+. I think that goes up to a B+ if you get the 2-liter turbocharged model, which does give you better fuel economy. There really are very few 3-row crossovers out there that get stellar fuel economy. We do have something like that Highlander hybrid, which will give you better fuel economy than this, but it's also going to be significantly more expensive. Pricing for the Sorento does get a little bit complicated because of how far this goes from the bottom end to the top end, so we'll take this in chunks. The L, LX, and LX V6 can be seen as the upgrade vehicle from something like a Toyota RAV4 or a Honda CR-V. This is priced relatively similarly to those other vehicles. It starts again at $24,900. The LX V6 goes on up to right around $33,000. Now you may be wondering where Kia's Sportage factors into things. The Sportage is actually the vehicle designed to compete with the RAV4 and the CR-V. It's not really meant to be this vehicle. That means that the L, LX, and LX V6 do cross over with the Sportage in terms of overall price range. However, this vehicle has the optional V6 and it also has the third row. Now you won't find the third row in the base L model, you do have to step up to the LX model in order to get it. Versus most of the mass market crossovers out there in that 2-row segment, this is bigger, it's quieter, it has that V6, has the optional third row, which is really left to just this and the Nissan Rogue. Interestingly enough, even though this is larger than something like a Toyota RAV4, it actually handles better than the Toyota. Although Kia does make some substantial changes to the Sorento between the base model and the model we're taking a look at right here, handling is actually very close across the board because the tire size remains constant from the bottom to the top end trims. Now in general, when we're comparing a small car and a large car of the same price, the large car like this ends up with fewer features than the smaller car. But that doesn't necessarily happen with the LX and the LX V6 models, especially when you're comparing them to the Toyota RAV4. Because the RAV4 doesn't really start that much below the base version of the Sorento, and the Sorento does give you more feature content in that base model. Nissan's Rogue is one of the few compact crossovers that has an optional third row in the back. This, of course, is not quite a compact crossover, so we actually get a larger third row and more cargo room in the back behind the third row than we get in the Rogue. We also get more legroom overall in this than we get in the Nissan. The other thing to keep in mind with the Nissan is that it does come with a CVT standard and there's no V6 option. So obviously the V6 version of this will be faster off the line than we get in the Nissan Rogue. It'll be a little bit more entertaining to drive than the CVT. The next group of Sorentos is the EX, the EX V6, and the SX model. The EX starts at $31,100 with a 2.0-liter turbocharged engine. If you want the V6, that's $31,900. The EX models, when fully equipped, will end up right around $40,000 or so, and the SX model is a little bit higher. These three trim levels are the ones that compete very directly with the Toyota Highlander and the rest of that mid-sized 3-row crossover segment. Keep in mind that although this is shorter on the outside than the Highlander, the interior dimensions are not necessarily that far off, and the third row in the back is not really that much less comfortable. Now on the surface of things, it may sound like the Sorento is not as good of a value as the Highlander, because it does start a little bit more expensive. A lot of people forget, however, that the Highlander starts with a 2.7-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine that's really only a little bit more powerful than the base 2.4 we get in this, and the EX model does start with that new 2-liter turbo. Of course, the V6 engine is only $31,900 if you'd prefer V6 power, and that is relatively similarly priced to what we get over there in the base V6 Highlander. However, we get more standard feature content in the Sorento by far. We get standard leather seats, a standard power seat, acoustic glass on the front windows. We also get fog lamps, 18-inch wheels, the 8-inch UVO infotainment system, backup camera, 2-zone automatic climate control, and auto-dimming mirrors. While the previous 3 trim levels didn't have a whole lot of options available, the EX opens the door to a lot of luxury options that we start to see in that larger 3-row crossover segment. Those available options include things like the optional Infinity sound system that this model has, navigation, blind spot monitoring, cross-traffic detection, the built-in AC inverter, the LC gauges, keyless go, auto up-down windows, the ginormous panoramic moonroof that we get in this model, the power tailgate, and the power folding mirrors. All of those will cost you significantly less than those same features in the competition. Now, if all of those options sound tasty to you, that's exactly what the SX model is designed for. It's basically a fully loaded EX with a few extra options and some slight trim differences. Specifically versus the Highlander, this has a nicer interior in my opinion. Especially the general design I find more appealing than what we get in the Highlander. This actually handles a little bit better, it has a longer warranty, and again, the interior size is relatively similar. Now, if you prefer a 2-row crossover and you don't really value the Highlander's 3rd-row seat, then that's especially where this becomes more interesting, because you can get this in a 2-row crossover version, and you can't get that in the Highlander. Fuel economy in the 2-row version of this will be higher than the Highlander because it does get that 2-liter turbocharged engine. Versus something like the Honda Pilot, the Pilot is considerably larger than this, and it's also an 8-passenger available crossover. And as such, in my mind, it doesn't compete as directly as the Toyota Highlander does. In terms of overall value, this will give you more features for similar dollar amounts or the same features for less than the Honda Pilot. We also get that longer warranty and slightly better handling dynamics in this than we get in the Pilot, but again, this is going to be much smaller than the Pilot. In the 5-seat version, this compares very well with Ford's Edge. The Edge is priced around $28,100 starting, goes on up to about $40,000 if you exclude that 2.7-liter twin turbocharged V6. The configuration of the two models is very similar, and likewise this is very similar in that form to the Santa Fe Sport, because they're both relatively large two-row crossovers. In terms of handling, I think that the Edge and the Sorento are very similar to one another, although I prefer the steering feel in this to the Ford. The Ford can feel a little bit overboosted at times. I think that this rear cargo area is a little bit more practical than the Edge, and I have to say that personally, I would get the 3-row version of this over the 2-row version, which directly competes with the Edge, because I do value that emergency third row. In terms of overall value, the Edge scores incredibly well in this segment, and feature for feature, they are very, very similar in terms of price, although the Kia does get a longer warranty. Of course, if fast acceleration and sporty handling are your thing, then Ford does sell that very tasty 2.7-liter twin-turbo Edge Sport, and there really isn't any comparison to this vehicle. Obviously, I can't cover every 3-row crossover in this segment, but in general, compared to the larger 3-row crossovers like the Pathfinder, the Acadia, the Traverse, etc., we obviously get much less space in this. So although I do find this to be a better value than the Pathfinder, the Traverse, Acadia, etc., if you need the room in the back, this really won't suffice. Now that said, if you can afford to give up some of that third row room, you will find a much better cabin in this. You'll also find more sporty driving dynamics. Now we're not done with trim levels yet because we still have the Limited and the V6 Limited to talk about. And that's what we're taking a look at here, is that top-end V6 Limited trim. It starts at $39,900 for the 2-liter turbo, $41,300 for this V6 right here. The big difference, of course, between the 2-liter turbo and the 3.3-liter V6 is that this one has the third row and the 2-liter turbo does not. It's the 5-passenger version. Now at this end of the spectrum, this obviously competes with the Ford Edge still, but it also competes with the Lincoln MKX, the Lexus RX, the Acura MDX perhaps, and according to Kia, even certain versions of the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Now with that Grand Cherokee, it's important to keep in mind that many Grand Cherokee buyers don't ever take their off-road vehicle actually off-road. Instead, the competitive set really is more like the Sorento here. Now that said, obviously the Jeep is much better off-road. It has different driving dynamics because it is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, but it's also more softly sprung, so it's not necessarily the sportier option. Similarly, if you value real wood trim and all those fancy accessories, something like the Lexus RX and the MKX are also going to be out of the running. But if you're taking a look at the lower end versions of those and you're after a value alternative, then obviously the Sorento is something to consider. Now this may surprise you, but the competitor that came to mind most with this fully loaded model that we've been looking at here is actually the Acura MDX. The MDX starts at $42,865 for the front-wheel drive version, because it now is available as a front-wheel drive vehicle, and ends up about $55,000, similarly configured to the model we're taking a look at here. That's about $10,000 more than the Sorento. Obviously, the Acura has a luxury brand name associated with it, and there is definitely value associated with that luxury brand for many people. And it does handle a little bit better than the Sorento, especially in the all-wheel drive versions. This all-wheel drive vehicle does not have a torque vectoring rear axle like we get in the MDX, and that really does help improve the dynamics. If we take a look at the luxury option list, the MDX does get an extra screen on its infotainment system, but actually it's no more fully featured than what we get in this model right here. It also has radar cruise control in its top-end versions, and it has a collision mitigating braking system, which we don't get in this model, but the radar cruise control in this model is much smoother than we find in the MDX. This also handles stop-and-go traffic much better than most modern Acuras. There are a few features on this that we don't find in the MDX, and there are a few features in the MDX that we don't find in this. The MDX actually does not get the option of soft Nappa leather like we find in this model. I actually think the driver's seat in this is a little bit more comfortable than the Acura as well. It's certainly more configurable. However, the Acura does have full LED headlamps that we don't find over here. These are again HIDs with halogen high beams, and they don't steer in the corners. The MDX is also a little bit larger, especially in the back seat, although it's not as large as the Honda Pilot. Outside the full-on Japanese and European luxury segment, the Sorento is my favorite crossover vehicle in the United States. That actually covers the 3-row segment as well as the compact 2-row crossover segment. And I would actually buy this over the Mazda CX-5, which I previously said was one of my all-time favorites. Now the CX-5 still handles better than this. It is obviously more fun to drive than this, and you can get a 6-speed manual, which I really like. However, this has more cargo room in the back. I personally find this infotainment system a little bit easier to use. It also has the hope of CarPlay and Android Auto in the future. There's definitely more power going on under this hood than you find in the CX-5 as well. The CX-5 gets either a 2-liter or a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine, and of course this can get the turbo or the 3.3-liter V6. The sort of Goldilocks just right size of the Sorento is the reason that some people dislike it, but it actually is the reason that this is my favorite in the segment. I personally don't need a full-time third row, and if you do, obviously this won't be the right option for you. But if you're looking at one of those two-row compact crossovers, this does make an interesting alternative because we get that emergency third row in the back, but it's not really that much larger on the outside, and it's not necessarily that much more expensive either. Because again, this does span from something like that RAV4 or the CR-V all the way on up to a base Highlander in those low-end configurations. If you're shopping from anything from a Toyota RAV4 on up to the 2016 Acura MDX, you'd do well to put the 2016 Kia Sorento on your shopping list. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you next week.